Hello everyone and happy Halloween. And today we're gonna be checking out a brand new video from Popcross Studios of turning more famous horror characters into brand new Marvel superheroes. Now if you haven't seen the first video, I do recommend checking it out both on his channel and mine for the reaction. And well, for Halloween, my costume is the Riddler. Classic, of course. This green jacket, and a nice hat. I don't have a bowler hat, so I went with my fedora, and a nice cane that glows in the dark. Now, let's hop in this video and see just which horror movie characters are now Marvel superheroes. Let's go!
As much as I love designing monstery versions of cute kinds of characters, I think I might have even more so enjoyed rewriting the lore and stories for menacing characters to make them more positive or heroic, like I did a couple weeks ago in famous horror movie characters as Marvel superheroes. That realization, paired with lots of great suggestions from all of you in the comments about what other horror movie characters I could use, has prompted a sequel for today. So let's get into it, shall we? Let's go!
Perfect video for Halloween itself.
If you want, subscribe if you feel like, but either way, enjoy the show.
Let's go.
Frederick Krueger led a simple life as the janitor of a high school in Hell's Kitchen. He was friendly with all the teachers and children, and there were never any complaints about him or his work ethic.
Freddy Krueger.
But people can turn on you very quickly when they're told a convincing lie. While working a night shift, Frederick heard a commotion outside the school. He went to the window to see three men rushing into the alley next to him, dragging the body of a local student. Frederick crouched to stay hidden, but picked up from the three men's conversation that they'd been selling drugs to the students, and promptly after taking them, this boy had had a seizure, and they were trying to wake him up. But it was no use.
That can be good.
He was dead. They then talked about all the other students they'd sold to that day, and how the batch they'd been distributing might have been tainted. Frederick tried to sneakily turn on his phone to record the conversation, but pressed the photo button in his nervous state, and the camera flashed, alerting the men to his presence. He dropped his phone in the scramble as the three men broke into the school to try and chase him down. Frederick managed to escape, but his troubles were far from over. Having taken his phone and found out who it was that had seen them, these men relayed the problem to their boss. And quickly, New York's kingpin of crime had his people on correcting the issue. Four other students had died from those drugs, and all the deaths were blamed on Frederick. Kingpin's people threatened other students' families to claim that Frederick had tried to sell them drugs as well. He was arrested, and while he couldn't afford an expensive lawyer, a compassionate, altruistic man named Matthew Murdock was willing to take on his case, believing him to be innocent.
Hold on, sorry about that. I just woke my computer up, so, everything was still turning on. Steam, Discord, everything. Sorry.
Believing him to be innocent. Murdoch was able to convince the courts that there was far from sufficient evidence to put Frederick away. But the judge and jury being convinced didn't mean the parents with lost children were as well. Losing a child can drive a person to a very dark place. A group of parents soon after created a small mob and hunted down Frederick as he worked one night. Still convinced his actions had led to the death of their children, they trapped him in the boiler room of the school and set it ablaze. Matt Murdock, in his nightly attire as a vigilante daredevil, had been silently checking in on Frederick since the case had closed, and arrived well after the parents had left. He busted down the door to the boiler room and dragged Frederick out, but by that time, his entire body was badly burned.
Damn.
He spent the night in a hospital bed, slipping farther and farther towards death. But right as he was on the brink, he seemed to awaken in a haze of green smoke and hovering stones. Soon, a man with pale skin and an eerie grin wandered into view. This was Nightmare, a demon who came to him with a deal. He knew of the circumstances of Frederick's death and wanted to give him an opportunity to get revenge on those who'd framed him and the parents who'd killed him. Nightmare would grant Frederick the ability to invade the dreams of the living with essentially godlike power to torment them. He wouldn't be able to cause them genuine physical harm, but Nightmare fed on the terror humans experienced in the night, and he believed Frederick could be a perfect new tool in bringing him more darkness to consume.
Not bad.
Frederick agreed, still enraged at all that had happened to him. Nightmare's only warning was to never be in contact with one of his victims when they awoke, or he could be dragged back into the real world, where he'd no longer be invulnerable and have his full abilities abilities. He'd be stuck in whatever state he'd been in before being dragged out. The first person whose dream he dove into was that of a girl named Nancy, who'd been one of the students to claim he'd tried to sell her drugs. But upon entering her dream, he saw that she was already having a terrible nightmare.
Oh.
It was blended with the real-world events of Kingpin's men threatening her family, and even revealed to him that her family had long since been under the thumb of Wilson Fisk, as her father had been forced to pay protection money to Kingpin's men for years to continue running his shop in Hell's
Damn
Kitchen.
it, Wilson.
This halted Frederick's lust for revenge. Visiting dreams of others who'd participated in his death showed him that they'd all just been terrified or manipulated by a situation that was ultimately the fault of Fisk and his men.
So
And
they were
so,
all just being controlled
Frederick's
and pretty
aim
much forced
changed.
to say,
He'd go into these people's
lie from
nightmares
us.
appearing as a
Makes
superhero,
sense.
resembling elements of real-world heroes he was familiar with. He'd first save these people from their nightmares. Then, he'd arm himself in a supersuit and have them bring him out of their dreams, temporarily back into the real world, where he'd use his weaponry to apprehend or kill Fisk's men. This would
Nice.
end up putting him at odds
Not
with his
bad,
own
Freddy.
ex-lawyer, Murdoch, who was strongly opposed to killing in any form. And, of course, Nightmare would be furious with
makes
Frederick
sense.
for acting in direct violation of their agreement. But all the challenges he'd face would not turn Frederick from his new goal to take down Fisk's operations, aided, one at a time, by the Kingpin's victims.
What could his superhero name be? Maybe Life Mail?
When Carrie White
No.
turned 13
Ooh,
and her mutant
Carrie. Now, he
abilities
was a
started
good
to
one.
manifest, her mother could not have been more horrified. Margaret
psychic
White believed
bloody
mutants
beauty,
were an abomination
Carrie.
sent by the devil to overthrow God's true children. Because of this, Carrie was forbidden to use her powers, and she only ever caught
nice
slight
going.
glimpses of what she could truly do. She was telekinetic, able to move things with her mind, but anytime she did, even accidentally, her mother would lock her in a closet and force her to pray for hours on end to God to remove her demonic abilities.
And that
On top
closet
of
was
being
just
an apparent
full
affront
of
to God,
Christianity stuff.
her mother
Crosses,
claimed
Bibles,
that if she ever
even
used her
ripped out
powers in
pages
public,
of the Bible.
people would be after
You know.
her, looking to string her up. Her small town had never seen a mutant up close before, and Carrie knew there was likely truth in what her mother was saying.
Oh, man.
Carrie went through high school terrified of her powers manifesting further and buried her desires to use them, even being convinced herself that these were simply voices in her head sent by the devil to trick her. Her school life
voices?
wasn't much better than her home life.
What do you
She was
mean,
afraid to
voices?
try and make friends and spent much of her time as a loner. Her mother forced her to wear very old-fashioned clothing that students often remarked looked as though they'd been dug out of the trash. One day, in response
I
to
was
this, a
at the grave.
particularly unpleasant girl at school
Yeah,
named
that's
Chris
one thing.
Hargensen filled Carrie's locker with garbage that dumped over her when she opened it. Chris and her friends nearby laughed emphatically and quickly made it clear that they'd perpetrated the act, to the applause of other students. That
And
was
the
the first
students are
time
assholes.
Carrie lost control in a public setting. Her eyes flashed red and all the garbage hurled off the ground and splattered onto Chris. It
There
was
you go,
satisfying
Carrie. That's
for
how you
her,
do
but
it.
immediately after doing this, fear fired through Carrie. She was terrified and could already see in her mind all the students trying to kill her for being a mutant, as her mother
Oh,
had
great.
so claimed they would. She ran
No,
from the
what's
scene,
Magneto for this?
but
Come on.
couldn't escape the call home to her mother. Chris had been banned from attending the prom for her cruel prank, and Carrie avoided getting in any serious trouble for her response, but her mother still locked her in a closet for the entire weekend to
Man,
repent.
that mother is
She
just
was let
shit.
out on Sunday night as a visitor came to the White residence looking for Carrie. The woman with a thick southern drawl introduced herself as Anna Marie, though often the public referred to her as Rogue. She said she
Yes!
was from Xavier's
Yes!
School for Gifted Youngsters, where they used a device called Cerebro to stay on watch for budding mutants who may be well suited to come learn to develop their gifts with others like them. Of course, Carrie's mother claimed this school must be a satanic cult and told Rogue to leave her home immediately. Rogue did as instructed, but left Carrie a
I'll
number
go
to
grab
call and
space.
promised her that even if she didn't come to Xavier's, to always remember that most people are not as afraid of mutants as she'd been led to believe. Most people would accept her as she was. Margaret, of course, spent the evening convincing Carrie that the opposite was true, and so, upon her return to
Oh,
school
damn
on
it.
Monday, Carrie was horrified that her fellow students would come after her and could feel leering looks the entire day. But before the day was out, one of the more popular boys from her grade, Tommy, who she'd always thought was very attractive, asked her to
Oh?
go with him to the prom. He said he thought it was cool that she was a
Wait,
mutant,
is that the
and
plot
how
from
she
the
reacted to
original
Chris's
movie?
prank was great. It was almost too good for Carrie to believe.
Maybe it
Her
is.
mother, of course, tried to convince her that this was all another prank, that the students who'd seen her use her abilities were just looking to further torment her for being a mutant.
I like
but
the
Carrie
blood-red
ignored her,
eyes.
made herself a beautiful dress, and went to the prom. The night was magical, the best of her life, and approaching its end, it seemed to get that much better, as she and Tommy were voted prom king and queen. Carrie thought it all
Awesome!
had to be too good to be true,
Yeah, it is.
and she was almost proven right. Through the clapping of the crowd, Chris Hargensen, who wasn't supposed to be on the premises at all, stepped out holding a rope and yelled, "Let's make your dress match your mutant freak eyes!" She tugged and released a bucket of blood above Carrie. Carrie looked up just in time and used her powers to stop the blood in midair.
Yes,
but in doing so,
yes.
she realized she'd be drawing even more attention to her powers in front of the entire school. She panicked and let the blood drop, and it splattered all over her.
Damn
but
it,
even
Carrie.
still, they'd all just seen her
Fine,
using
fine.
her powers. Images flashed through her mind of the whole crowd getting up in arms trying to burn the mutant freak. Rage and the need to defend herself started to bubble in Carrie's mind.
There you go.
But she let Rogue's words ring through. A reminder that not everyone would be so afraid of her as she'd been convinced. The dark fantasy of students
Listen
coming
to
after
Rogue.
her faded, and she could see that the reality was the majority of students were booing Chris for her actions. Tommy was immediately trying to console Carrie and swearing that he had nothing to do with what just happened. Nobody in sight was
Good
coming
people.
to harm her. If not for Rogue's message, Carrie could see a
that's
dark
good news.
alternate version of herself going on a rampage through her school in response. And so, she was convinced that day to make the call. She wouldn't become a full-time student at Xavier's, but would attend during the
Xavier's
summers.
Academy!
She wanted to develop her gifts, but also wanted a foot in the real world, learning to see the good and acceptance in the majority of people around her, as well as to thicken her skin when she did come across more people like Chris. Carrie would become a fantastically powerful, occasional member of Xavier's school, all the while growing more confident and self-loving, and even helping her mother to see that mutants were God's children too, and that her
Finally.
powers were not something to fear.
Now that's good news. And we're back. Superhero.
Priodat was part of one of the most
Blood
powerful
Mind?
races of hunters in
No.
all the galaxy. But he wasn't exactly
These
living in
superhero
line
names
with
are
his
actually
people's
tricky to figure
ways.
out.
The Ayuja had many rites of passage that demanded their young seek out dangerous prey to hunt across the galaxy. But
Cool.
when this demand led to the death of Priodat's father at the hands of a burly Austrian-sounding American man on Earth, Priodat began
Arnold
to resent
Schwarzenegger.
his own people's ways. He eventually abandoned his people for the world of Sakaar to compete in their fighting arenas. He'd tried to return once to visit
Bold.
his home, but had been turned away and threatened with execution for ignoring his people's ways, and he was labeled with the title of Bad Blood, reserved for Yautja criminals. He acted
mean
as though
Yautja?
he didn't care, but it did sting having his own people refuse his return. To drown his sorrows, he spent his time partying and gambling away all the credits that he earned from his fights and from the occasional bounty hunting mission he took on.
I
His
guess you
fame
gotta
in the
do
ring,
something.
paired with his pristine bounty hunting record, eventually led to a Kree accuser called Ripley approaching him with a task. She claimed that a dangerous Kree experiment called a Xenorph had escaped on her watch, and that she had other duties to attend to, and needed a hunter to handle the
So
situation
this is how the
quickly
Predator
and
goes after
quietly.
the alien.
She told
Nice.
Priodat that the experiment had been taken in by the Guardians of the Galaxy, and that Priodat would likely have to get through them all to reach his target and slay it. Priodat was
Well,
up
at
for
least
the
he's in good
challenge
hands.
after being offered a significant sum for the task. With the ship and the tech that he'd taken with him when leaving his own homeworld, Priodat tracked down the Guardians of the Galaxy. He found them on Nowhere, and could have dispatched with them silently, one at a time, as a tactical member of his species would have. But spending so much time in the spotlight of the arena had changed his combat style. He marched right up to them and punched the largest of them, Drax the Destroyer, right in the jaw, beginning a lengthy brawl with the group. Priodat's biological advantages, paired with his practice in the fighting rings, showed, and he slowly but surely whittled away the Guardians, though thankfully not killing any of them, before getting to his target. A young alien woman with an extended head and bladed tail. She proved to be a much more even match for him, evading all his weapons and landing many blows of her own. Even when he managed to slice through her side, her blood melted his wrist blades and left him a weapon down. Still, he eventually managed to get her pinned, with her own tail held to her throat.
Wait, what did that message
As he was
say?
about to complete his mission, she...
Hold on. I might need to chill a bit on all the metal scuffs. Maybe a bit.
Pinned, with her own tail held to her throat. As he was about to complete his mission, she said, "I refuse to die until I've saved my people." That gave Priodat pause. This target was just supposed to be an experiment gone wrong. He pressed her for more information, and she told him that her people had originally been the result of Kree experimentation, but that they'd been living in peace on a Kree moon for hundreds of years, before Ripley the Accuser found them and slaughtered the majority of them, then took the remaining few back to the Kree homeworld for more experimentation. This woman was Eloise, daughter of the once queen of her people. She'd sworn to save her people, and the Guardians had agreed to help her. Upon learning all of this, Priodat released her. His own people may have rejected him, but perhaps this was an opportunity for at least some form of redemption. He too then agreed to help her, and despite a rocky first encounter, Priodat and Eloise became fast friends. Not long later, they would manage to save her people, and then they'd become more than friends. And someday their own child would become a founding member of the next generation of the Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah! A bred alien made biologically, I guess. That's nice. That's what I like to hear.
When Mike was a boy, his parents had a hard time raising him. He was non-communicative. Not only could he not speak, but they could hardly even get him to nod or shake his head in response to the things they asked. It was hard going for them, but they did their best. Until the night of the incident. When he was 6 years old, Mike's parents had gone to the movies and left him and his older sister, Judith, at home with a babysitter, a young woman who was new to town, named Lori. They returned to a horrible scene of Lori screaming, running from the house, claiming that Mike had just killed his sister with a kitchen knife. The parents ran inside and found Mike standing petrified next to his sister's lifeless, bloody body. Because of his inability to communicate, Mike was unable to tell them that Lori had in fact killed Judith, and done so with an evil grin on her face. When Mike came to see what was going on, she then stabbed him in the throat. But the wound immediately healed. She tried again and again, but every time she sliced him, he'd heal as the blade left his body. She was about ready to panic. Lori had been on a killing spree through several towns, being dubbed by the media the Sitter Slayer. But never had she come across a complication like this, though she quickly found a solution. All through her attempted assaults on him, Mike had just been staring down at his sister in shock. So, Lori cut a gash into her own arm, then grabbed Mike's hand and forced the knife into it. He just continued to stand there, staring down at his sister, wielding the knife. Handle. She waited until his parents returned.
They can test the handle for
manipulation successful, Mike was believed to be the killer, and taken to a sanatorium where they made little progress in helping him or getting any information out of him.
Come on, guys.
As they discovered his invulnerability, he was eventually transferred to Ravencroft Institute, which specialized in superhuman criminals, in the hope that they'd have the resources to contain him if his powers grew further. By the time he was in his early 20s, many had just accepted that he'd essentially remain institutionalized for life. But when a man named Cletus Cassidy was locked up in his same cell block, that would set in motion the means for his freedom. Cassidy was better known to the world as the
Carnage.
symbiote-enhanced murderer Carnage, and not long after his
Knew
arrest,
it.
an ally of Carnage would break in with a fragment of his symbiote to help him escape. Mike would see the ally go past his cell and immediately recognize her as Lori. She'd aged and changed her hair, but he
Can't
knew
be.
it was her. Lori freed Carnage, and the symbiote serial killer tore through all the cages, releasing all of the inmates. Mike saw many of the most cruel and maniacal villains that he'd
Go,
been locked
Michael.
away with for so long escaping, and was finally stirred into action.
Do it.
At a slow, lumbering pace, he marched through the crowds of fleeing villains and fought them all, hitting hard enough to knock many of them unconscious in one blow. He lurched on
super
after
strength.
Lori, but she
I
was
like
moving
it.
too fast and was out the door in a car before Mike could catch her.
Ah, damn
Luckily,
it.
he had another power laying dormant that he could only finally use once he stepped out of sight of any people or security cameras. As long as nobody was looking at him, he could
Teleportation.
teleport. He ported himself
Oh,
behind a
now
tree
that's
down the
actually
road
clever.
ahead of
Very
Lori and
clever. I
Carnage,
give
who were
props.
escaping together, and stepped out into the street. They tried to just mow him down in the car, but upon being struck, he clung to the hood and tried to pull himself up into the vehicle. They
Damn.
screeched to a halt and tried to kill Mike, but every blow healed instantly. Upon seeing this, Lori
Not
realized
bad.
just who this was, and she got back in the car to flee once more. But Mike wouldn't leave her be this time. Few fully understand his motives, or why exactly the breakout finally stirred him to take up arms against criminals. But after that night, Mike donned a cloak and supersuit and hunted
was
down
putting out,
Lori
what,
and
6?
every other villain who'd escaped from Ravencroft. He may not be able to traditionally communicate, but his actions clearly show that this mysterious superhuman only wants to protect people from the evils of this world.
Alright, I'm gonna say it. And Michael Myers, this one, definitely the best. Maybe his superhero's
Well,
name
I'd say
is
round 2 wins
the
out
Knight.
over round 1 for me. But I am happy with how both episodes turned out.
Oh
If
yeah,
you're new to the
both were
channel and haven't
amazing.
seen the
I gotta
previous
give you
episode, I'll link it
props.
in the cards. Recommend going back to it.
Oh,
or you might
surely.
also like my recent famous video game characters if they were on the Suicide Squad episode. And by all means, leave me more suggestions for characters I could use if this ends up getting around 3. But besides that, that's all for today.
That'd be
Except,
cool.
of course, for ending this video on some kind of positive or inspiring note. And the thought I want
Give
to
it
leave
to
people
us.
with today is a really nice, simple one that I read this week. A quote by someone named Dan Mace, who says that worrying is a misuse of your imagination. Simple, hard-hitting, and
I mean,
great.
yeah,
I'm
it
going to
makes
leave it
sense.
at that. Thank you so
Why
much for
worry
watching,
about
everybody. I
something that
love you
couldn't
all,
be?
and I'll see you all in the next episode on Friday. Goodbye.
Alright folks, and that is where we're going to end off today's video. I'm going to move back over here and there. So, I want you all to remember to like, comment, and subscribe for more. Down in the description will be a link to the original video, so remember to support the original creator and all they do. And I'll see all of you folks next time when we flick on. This is Fox, signing out. Happy Halloween!